Have we discovered new contenders for the traditional top 6? Brighton, Newcastle, even Aston Villa want to shout out in there. And you've got on the opposite end teams like Chelsea and Spurs that are in turmoil. Let's start with Newcastle first of all. They've had an incredible season. I love this, by the way. We have Spurs and Chelsea in the room. Newcastle have an incredible season. Eddie Howe hired. They'll be potentially in the Champions League next season. More money coming in. And they'll spend more money. So far, they've spent quite wisely. It'll be interesting to see what they do next. Because at the moment, they've done the whole... Well, in the space of... They're a good side, but not a great side. Next season, people will take them very, very seriously. But what have you been impressed with it in general?
In general, I've been impressed as to how they've recruited, to be honest with you. I know we talk about what they've done, but it has been sensible. And I think sometimes you have to give credit. When I look at, the money and where it's gone on Tottenham and Chelsea, the strategy they've gone down has been great. They haven't changed too much. It's essentially they've kept the furniture, but added some pillows. If I'm looking at it from that sense, they've added a bit of flair. They've brought in, some experience in Kieran Trippier, which I think is a brilliant signing. So they've given that mentality to them. Bruno Guimaraes, great signing. I can't believe not more clubs were in and around after him. You added Dan Burn, good signing. Sven Botman, good signing. Nick Pope, good signing. You have built a spine of your team. Then you put Alexander Isak in, so at the moment is giving like Henri flair. It's wild. And I think that you have to really commend, obviously, the board coming in. I think they've probably looked at how Manchester City did it and learnt a little bit. When City first came in, they splashed the cash a little bit on, remember, Joe and what was his name, Robinho. People like that. I think they've learned. Obviously, times are a little bit different now. And I guess maybe they have to kind of go with an FFP potentially as well. But, to make these signings who on paper you'd look and say, oh, they're decent signings, they're not going to blow you away, but all together as a team, with the manager they've got in Eddie Howe, with the structure they've put in place, the development that he's brought to the squad, and just the mindset and mentality of it, he has created a side which is going to be in the Champions League. And you have to sometimes give them your flowers. You don't have to spend big, you just have to spend wisely.
Well, what they've been very clever with doing is that a lot of players that come to England have been burdened by the price tag. What they've done is they've mitigated that by paying these players a lot of money. Like Bruno Guimaraes' contract is crazy. Wild. Dan Burns getting paid crazy amounts, but the transfer fee wasn't that much. So if those players aren't successful, they're not burdened by that. Think about the narrative around Jack Grealish when he first signed for City. £100 million. But it's with Newcastle, they've kind of signed these players who are on a lot of money, but not high price tags. So it's allowed them time to settle in. And the Bruno Guimaraes signing was a very astute one. The Nick Pope one was an incredible one.
Great
because
signing.
you think that football's maybe moved past a player like that because he's not necessarily the best with the ball at his feet, and to be fair, at the back end of the season has been found wanting. But in terms of his ability to save shots and the confidence that he gives his back four when he comes for crosses, and his it's just overall kind of aura that brings a calmness back there. He's been a great signing, and Kieran Trippier, who's won the armband for the majority of the season, has been incredible. So you've got to really give them credit. And the problem with Newcastle for fans like Chelsea and Spurs, who are established part of this fallacy of the big six, is that they're here to stay. When you look at the other sides that we're going to discuss, maybe if one or two signings don't go right, it could see the end of their kind of push to play European football constantly. But with Newcastle, they've got infinite funds to bring in the best players in the world year on year on year, and it's only a matter of time before we see this Newcastle side challenge for league titles.
Absolutely.
On the flip side of that, another club that is perfectly ran, near enough perfectly you'd say, is Brighton, but on a lesser scale to Newcastle. The recruitment process is very similar in the sense of they sign players very cleverly, but also very different in the sense that Brighton are looking for players that no one's ever heard of. Cucurella leaves, they're replacing with Purvis Estupiñán, literally with the blink of an eye. Now there's potentially a chance Moses Caicedo goes. They already have someone lined up, we know that. And they're linked very heavily to João Pedro at Watford, who's wanted by Everton and Newcastle as well. What have they done well? Because De Zerbi's currently, they've brought De Zerbi in, replaced Potter, and it felt like nothing changed. Obviously on the pitch things had changed, but in terms of the profile of managers was even lined up really perfectly. Yeah,
it's just they've gone about it the perfect way, and if you got to just give credit to their recruitment, because like you say, they go to South America and they find these players that nobody's heard of, and then they give them a year to settle in. So with McAllister, he wasn't thrown straight in. With Caicedo, it's the same thing. They give them time to bed in, and it seems to work consistently. The only problem for Brighton is, if you look at the history of Premier League football, everyone lauded the way that Southampton went and got players and replaced players, and get like Lovren signed for Liverpool, we'll go and bring in Van Dijk, and eventually that cycle does come to an end because you miss on the signing or you miss on the transfer, and then suddenly you gradually start to see yourself decline in the Premier League. Swansea had a similar thing where they had a great philosophy, they'd bring in a player, they'd lose Ben Davies and they'd bring somebody else in, but eventually it dissipates. Your squad loses that strength, and we expect McAllister to go, we expect Caicedo to go, and whether those replacements are good enough to step up remains to be seen. We have a lot of faith in the way that Brighton ran, that it will continue to be successful, but eventually that does come to an end because they haven't got infinite funds to kind of bring in these players consistently, and they can't afford to miss on players.
Yeah, I think I agree with you for the most part, and about the missing on players, but they're not spending a huge amount. You know, they're selling for such a high price and profit. When you think about it, they have sold Ben White for £50 million, who at the time everyone's going, what on earth, you know, but he's been great for Arsenal, and it's been worth it. Trossard, £27 million, Basuma, £30 million, Cucurella, £60 million after one good season.
Hoodwinked.
So you say that, you know, that they haven't got the money, but they've got money sitting there. If they wanted to invest in a few big signings, they could go and do that. They've got more than enough money. McAllister, £9 million, £2.6 million for Matoma, and Caicedo for £5 million. So if you think about it, even though they're selling at such a high price and profit, they're still not spending the world. So even if one or two don't work out, which I'm sort of sure it does behind closed doors, not really much of a loss, is it?
What's interesting is because they're now going for João Pedro, proven player. He's probably in the top 2 best players in the Championship. He was very good even in the Premier League, and so there might be a little tinker to their strategy to go to get to that next level. We're going to need to spend a little bit more on more recognised names, while still doing the little bit underneath. That is where I think you could go. That might be the direction Brighton going. Club like Chelsea, I mean, it's just bad signings galore at this stage. Todd Bowley's come in and spent money infinitely, 600 million, I believe it is. And no one knows what's going on. No
one knows what's going on, and you see the players that we signed sitting on the bench and not being able to start. And again, it comes down to, I've said it so many times, football's manager's game. If, for example, say Mudryk would have signed for Arsenal, we're seeing Mudryk be a good player. We're seeing Mudryk kind of not looking like how he's looking for Chelsea, or we can't even see what he's looking like for Chelsea because he doesn't play enough games. If these players go to teams that have got established managers, they look very, very different. Look at a player like Enzo Fernandez, who's got all the ability in the world, but we're not using him in the right position. We're asking him to do things that he's not used to doing, and that's where the problem starts for Chelsea, because we've been such an established force for such a long time. We haven't now got the lure of European football. We haven't got the manager in place that can kind of attract these big names to come and bring the good times back to Stamford Bridge. And so if Chelsea don't get this next managerial appointment right, then it could be years in limbo for the club, because it's so competitive in the Premier League, and the whole fallacy of the Big Six has been built up, and it's the Big Six are playing this weekend, or like Chelsea are not part of that anymore. And I've accepted it as a Chelsea fan. We're not part of that conversation until we prove it on the pitch, and sitting 11th in the Premier League table and we're hitting May at the moment. It's unacceptable, and Chelsea need to be worried and looking over their shoulder, because there are clubs that are ran way better than Chelsea coming. There's
a lot of similarities between Chelsea and Spurs in the sense of decision making is poor. Spurs obviously bought in Stellini when Conte left, waited until Stellini got battered against Newcastle, and then bought in Mason, who's already kind of ready to go. And then also you had the issue with Jed Spence, who apparently Conte didn't want, then had to replace Jed Spence for 40 million by buying Pedro Porro, and then got rid of Conte, who signed Pedro Porro. It's just like constant. And Chelsea are in the same sort of cycle, whereby you sign a player who's not quite the fit for that manager or that plan, then you have to replace that player, you have to ship that player off. The money's going down. Daniel Levy is obviously someone who's very shrewd and really cares about the cash, as most people would if you're involved in a club at that level. Spurs, the same as Chelsea?
I think there's a glaring difference in the budget, for sure. My thing with Chelsea, just before I talk about Spurs, obviously it's expected that Mauricio Pochettino is going to come in. At the time of recording, he's not there yet, but he probably will be. And I think that you're looking at it from maybe a point that you're not excited about having Pochettino in. You're thinking, I'm excited because it hurts Spurs fans, but I'm not excited about the prospects. And one thing I would say, when he first came into Tottenham, they had a lot of deadwood. They had the likes of Adebayor there, Aaron Lennon left over, Yunus Kabul, all these players. And first thing he did was clear out a lot of them, which is what you guys need. You've got so many players.
It's a 45-man squad.
Honestly, you've got so many. A lot of them are new, but you've got a lot of players there that aren't going to ever feature for Chelsea. It's not going to happen. So that will be one thing I would expect him to do first. To have a little bit of a clear out.
Yeah.
He loves young players. He did so well with Tottenham. You know, arguably could have done better in terms of maybe getting over the line. But you know, he made Tottenham challenging again on a very small budget.
Well,
2 seasons at Wembley, got into a Champions League final.
I
I'm just
completely
saying,
agree.
it's
I
not
completely
all
agree.
dark and dark
But
for
like,
you.
okay, so let's just accept where Spurs have been historically in terms of Premier League football. Like in the 90s and the early noughties, they weren't a side that challenged for Champions League football. They were in and around mid-table. Your glory years have coincided with you having a generational striker up top scoring you 20 goals a season every year. Chelsea haven't got that.
Yeah, but
Chelsea
you
haven't
have
got
money
that.
that can fix it. So even though you've spent £500 million on signings, you'll go in the summer.
You can't buy Harry Kane.
You
You could
can't.
actually. You could. You actually could.
Oh,
If you've got Pochettino there.
No,
Yeah.
you can't, but you might be able to get them on a free next summer. But yeah, looking at Tottenham, I mean, the problem is everything is half-hearted at Tottenham. So if you want, you know, your first choice fullback, your first choice defender, I'll give you an example. Last summer, Tottenham wanted Bastoni from Inter Milan. Bastoni had only been at Inter a year. He didn't want to move. So at that point, you go, okay, where's my number 2 target? They didn't have a number 2 target, so they settled on getting a loan with Clement Lenglet from Barcelona. They should learn Tottenham. If Barcelona don't want a player, he's not usually up to the standard that you'd want. And I've also seen it with Emerson Royale. And I think that's the problem. Tottenham don't ever go for their first choice. They always end up for their 4th, 5th, 6th choice or someone from the back end of the Dutch league. And that is, unfortunately, the problem. So you can't always expect, as a Tottenham fan, or as a chairman, to be in and around the top 4, to be challenging when you don't want to spend the money. And what annoys me, I have to say the most as a Tottenham fan, is that the owners have the same amount of money that Roman Abramovich did. But the difference is that they never have invested into the club out of their own pocket. Everything that comes into the club is from revenue, from Pochettino over the years, getting them into the top four, Champions League final, TV deals. And if they actually wanted to back this side, I genuinely think we could be quite competitive because, well, we could have been. I think now is a time where they need to do a whole new rebuild. But they need to do it right. And as you mentioned, Nubaid, they've got so many players left over. We've got players left over from Poch's era. We've got players left over from Mourinho. We've now got players left over from Conte. And I think the problem is you're buying, with Daniel Levy and Enoch always having the final say on who comes in, it takes away the judgment and really the importance of the manager. It's the manager who should be in control of the footballing decisions. And when you've got the owner and a chairman constantly, you know, making those final calls, it can kind of create a bit of tension. I think that's what we're seeing with managers who want to win something and be dominant in Jose Mourinho, Antonio Conte. Maybe Pochettino was a little bit more accepting of it because the situation Tottenham were in with moving to the new stadium and things like that. But I think if Tottenham are going to stay around, and I say the top 6 because I think top 4 for Tottenham is now going to be gone with Newcastle's resurgence. I think if they are going to be in around the top 6 and still have any type of European football, they are going to have to get their, you know, kind of their minds in gear. They're going to have to back the next manager that comes in and make sure it's the right appointment, not a trophy now manager, because that isn't what Tottenham are. They're a club that plays lovely attacking football, get back to the original DNA, trust in the manager, bring through youth, don't have to go and break the bank, but you need to buy talent that fits within the system and first and foremost rebuild. Hugo Lloris, he's I think 36 now. I mean, he needs to go. The back 4, I think we've been crying out for defence for 2-3 years, new defenders. They need to decide what formation they're playing because they need to decide which manager they're bringing in. And then at that point, let the manager do what he wants.
There is a lot of things to fix at Spurs, and Chelsea, Brighton and Newcastle are sitting tidy.
Thanks so much for watching ESPN on YouTube. And for more sports highlights and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app. And for premium content and live streaming, subscribe to ESPN Plus.